when my daughter-in-law called in panic. A family reconciled. For years, I had grown used to the quiet hum of my small, modest house. Ever since Richard, my only child, had moved out to start his own life, the days seemed to pass by in slow waves. I had been content with the life of a pensioner, enjoying the simple pleasures of gardening, reading, and the occasional trip to the market. That's what my life had become, quiet and predictable. When Richard met Emily, I was thrilled for him. He had found someone he loved, and I hoped that I could be a part of their new journey together. I imagined the future, one where I'd have Sunday dinners with them, where they'd bring their children over, and I could be the doting grandmother. But reality was far different. Emily never seemed to warm up to me. At first, I thought it was just the nervousness of joining a new family, but over time, her coldness never thawed. Her eyes always seemed to study me, analyzing my every move, as though she were trying to find a reason to push me away. Despite my best efforts to connect with her, the walls she built around herself seemed impenetrable. My son, Richard, loved her, and that was enough for me. Even though I sensed that Emily had a deep discomfort whenever I was around, I convinced myself that things would get better with time. After all, family is built on patience and understanding. Or so I thought. The unexpected rejection. One winter afternoon, I had decided to visit their home for what I thought would be an ordinary, pleasant visit. I had been invited over to see my grandson, a chubby-cheeked toddler who had become the light of my world. The thought of spending time with him brought me a joy that I hadn't experienced in years. As I approached the front door, my hands holding a small gift for the baby, something felt off. Emily opened the door, but instead of the usual polite, though distant greeting, her face was tight, her mouth set in a firm line. "We need to talk," she said, stepping aside and motioning for me to come in. I walked into the house, feeling the tension in the air. Richard wasn't home. Only Emily and my grandson were there. My heart sank as I noticed the way she glanced at me, as if sizing me up for a battle. I sat down awkwardly on the sofa, clutching the gift in my lap, waiting for her to speak. I could sense the shift in the dynamic before she even opened her mouth. "There's no place for a poor pensioner here," she said, her voice flat, but the words sharp as knives. "Richard and I are trying to build a life for ourselves, and we can't keep having you around all the time. You're not exactly contributing to our life." For a moment, I couldn't process what I had just heard. My breath caught in my throat, and I stared at her, blinking as though that would make her take the words back. But the coldness in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She meant every word. I'm sorry, what do you mean?" I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. "I've never asked for anything, Emily. I only wanted to be part of my grandson's life, and Richard's." But she cut me off with a dismissive wave. "You're always here, it's too much. We need space, and frankly, you don't fit into the future we're planning. We're not a charity." Her words echoed in my ears. "You don't fit into our future." I sat there, stunned, while Emily got up and left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I had always been careful not to impose, to never ask for help. But here I was, being treated like an unwanted guest in my own family's life. That day, I left their house quietly, with no dramatic confrontation. I didn't fight back or raise my voice. I simply walked out of the door and made my way back to my little home, tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. The silent months. After that painful day, everything changed. I stopped visiting Richard and Emily. I couldn't bear the thought of facing her again, of being made to feel like I didn't belong in their lives. It wasn't just Emily's cruel words that hurt, it was Richard's silence. He had said nothing, just standing in the background, watching me leave as though it were the easiest thing in the world. For months, I tried to convince myself that I could live without them. My heart ached every day, missing my grandson's laughter, Richard's familiar voice, and even the hope of rebuilding some kind of bond with Emily. But the pain ran too deep. I busied myself with small tasks around the house, volunteering at the local library and gardening, but nothing could fill the void that had formed. I told myself that I was better off without them, but deep down, I longed for Richard to call. I waited for the phone to ring, for some acknowledgement that I still mattered to him. But the phone remained silent, and the weeks turned into months. The panic call. One late autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the phone rang unexpectedly. The sound startled me. I had grown used to the quiet and the loneliness that had settled over my life. When I picked up the phone, I recognized Emily's voice on the other end, but it wasn't the calm, cold tone I had come to expect. She sounded frantic, desperate. "Can you come over?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I really need your help." For a moment, I stood there, frozen in place. Emily, the same woman who had told me I had no place in their lives, was now asking for my help. I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to refuse, to remind her of the way she had treated me, but something in her voice told me that this was serious. "What happened?" I asked cautiously, already grabbing my coat from the hook by the door. "It's Richard," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He left. We had a terrible argument, and he just walked out. I don't know where he is." My heart dropped into my stomach. Richard had left? I didn't ask for details. I knew I needed to be there, regardless of the past. Without another word, I rushed over to their home. When I arrived, Emily was standing at the door, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. It was a sight I had never expected to see. This woman who had always been so controlled, so composed, now looked completely broken. "Please come in," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Inside, the house felt different. The air was thick with tension and fear. My grandson was sitting quietly in the living room, unaware of the chaos around him. I gave him a small smile before turning my attention back to Emily. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her hands shaking. "Richard won't answer his phone, and I'm scared. I can't do this alone." It was the first time Emily had ever shown me vulnerability, and I realized in that moment that she wasn't the cold, unfeeling person I had always believed her to be. Beneath the icy exterior, she was just a woman, overwhelmed and terrified of losing her family. I sat down beside her on the couch, taking her trembling hands in mine. "We'll figure this out," I said softly. "We'll find him. You're not alone." Rebuilding trust. Over the next few days, I stayed by Emily's side. Richard eventually returned, but it was clear that the cracks in their relationship were deep. There had been arguments about finances, about the pressures of raising a child, about Emily's insecurities and fears. It was messy and painful, but in the midst of all the turmoil, something surprising happened. Emily and I began to talk, really talk. For the first time, she opened up about her own struggles, her fear of being inadequate, and how she had always felt that she had to keep control over everything. I realized that much of her coldness toward me had been a result of her own internal battles. Her fear that she wasn't living up to the expectations of being a perfect wife and mother. In turn, I shared my own feelings, the hurt I had carried for months, the pain of being pushed away. We didn't heal everything overnight, but slowly, bit by bit, we began to understand each other. Richard and Emily worked through their problems, and in time I became a regular presence in their lives again, not as a poor pensioner, but as a grandmother, a mother, and someone they could rely on. Life has a way of turning things around when you least expect it, and while the scars of the past remain, they no longer define us. Now, we face the future together, as a family should. After being cruelly cast aside by her daughter-in-law, who claimed there was no place for a poor pensioner in her life, a mother finds herself abandoned by her own family. But when a sudden crisis leaves her daughter-in-law desperate and panicked, she is forced to turn to the very person she rejected. In a story of unexpected twists, buried emotions are revealed, and a once broken family must find a way to rebuild trust, forgiveness, and unity. Will this crisis mend the fractured bonds, or will the pain of the past be too great to overcome?